Beautiful. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. It's really lovely to be here. I'm Adam. Folks know me sometimes from my book, Bright Spots and Landmines. I wrote for many years at Diatribe, and now I work as a therapist up here in San Francisco. And I am really excited to be here. I'm going to share a talk that I did at the Diabetes Mind event in November, which was in person. So we'll see how this talk translates to Zoom. And so I am going to share. I'm going to share, if folks can mute, that would be really helpful because it really throws off the flow when voices come in. So I'm going to share a few slides, and then Joanne has graciously volunteered to do a little juggling demonstration with me. And that's going to be a metaphor that we're going to carry through the talk. So hang tight here while I share screen. All right, can folks see that okay? Yeah, okay. So the title of this talk, Bright Spots and Landmines in Diabetes Tech and Mental Health. And I'm really excited to be here. So the question we're going to consider here at the start is a little bit of a strange question for a diabetes talk, but you'll understand why in a bit. And it's, how do you become more skillful at juggling? So one of the hobbies that I took up during the pandemic was juggling. And we're going to use that right now. So Joanne, if you'll come on screen with me. There she is. So Joanne, I'm going to coach you to juggle. And let me just pin your video and spotlight it for everyone. Great. So Joanne, I'm going to coach you to juggle with two different styles of coaches, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Coach number one is here. My name's Lou. Okay, so my juggling philosophy is this: avoid dropping. Okay? Dropping is bad. Avoid it. Go ahead and juggle.
With 3 balls, or can I do?
Yes, yes, yes. My other philosophy is that I want you to learn everything all at once. Okay? So you just dive right in. Go ahead and juggle. Another thing I should mention, Joanne, about my coaching style. Every time you do something wrong, I'm gonna alarm you. And I'm gonna alarm you with a very specific sound. You ready for it?
I am.
Eh, eh, eh. Okay. So go ahead and juggle again. Eh, eh, eh. Okay. Yep, keep trying again. My philosophy around juggling is just to avoid dropping.
I heard you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Eh, eh, eh. Eh, eh, eh. Eh, eh, eh. You're doing something wrong. But I'm not actually going to be precise about what it is. I'm just going to leave it to you to figure out. Yeah, yeah. Do you have 3 balls there, or are you using 2?
Not
Oh,
doing.
I see. There's a third ball that you're hiding. Oh, okay, okay. Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Ah.
This is terrible. It's not working.
All right. Joanne, thank you for dealing with Lou's juggling style. How was that for you to lose style?
I felt the flesh in my body and a little bit of anxiety. Yeah.
Yes, it's anxiety provoking, right? Totally. Yeah. Okay. I also meant to mention, and you can pause for a sec, because I'm going to go back to this for a second. So that was Lou's style. Lou loves data. He's such a fan of data. So here's the data that I'm giving you. Your time in juggling was 0%. The goal is 70, so you're really short of the goal, Joanne. I'm sorry. And we try to target 100 catches per minute, and we were at about 20. So there we are. How's that to hear? That data, what's that like for you?
I feel like giving up. This is why should I bother?
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, lose not for everyone.
Easy for
Yeah.
anybody. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. So that's Lou. Now let's switch to Bob. Bob is a very different juggling coach. Okay. So Bob likes to take things one step at a time. So I know you have 3 balls, but I'm just going to ask you to drop 2 of them, and we're just going to start with 1. Okay. So I just want you to get a nice back and forth going. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Nice. Yeah. And your temptation's going to be to watch the ball, but I just want you to really look at the apex. Yeah, it's a little bit more tricky. Yeah. That's okay. That happens. Yeah. Nice. How's that feeling?
A little bit better.
Yeah. It's a little more doable.
I like the no noise
Yeah. The noise is really annoying, isn't it?
terribly.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we're just practicing like a nice gentle parabola here. You're doing a really nice job getting it back and forth. Beautiful. Nice. That looks pretty good. How do you feel about picking up a second ball? It is a step up in difficulty, but I think you're ready for it.
You can try it.
Okay. So with 2 balls, let me just demonstrate for you. This is one of the things that's important to me as a coach is modeling the behavior before I ask you to do it. Okay. So with 2, you're just going to get a nice throw, catch, catch. Throw, catch, catch. Throw, catch, catch. Throw, catch, catch. And some people find it helpful to picture a box, and you're trying to hit the corners of the box. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, give it a try. See how it is.
Nope.
Ah, yes. You did the classic thing, which is totally okay, which is this. You see that?
Yes, I did.
You did a sort of horizontal pass. Everyone who learns to juggle does this, so it's totally okay. So throw, throw. You see that? That second ball needs to go up. Yes, that's so good. So good. Yes, so good. And it's so counterintuitive to do that, to like let that second ball go. Yes. Go ahead and give it another try. You're doing a beautiful job. Oh, that was still better than the horizontal pass. I love that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give that another shot. Yeah, I love that you're getting both balls out of your hands. Not everyone can even do that part. So that's really good. Yeah, try a couple more. Nice. You were like, let me throw them at the same time. Maybe that'll maybe that'll work. Nice.
Ah,
I like that you're trying something different. I will want you to stagger them eventually, like throw, throw, rather than throw. Better, better. Yeah. See if you can delay that second one a little bit.
okay.
And everyone just hang with us. Ah, you know exactly what you did. Yeah, that's okay. I love that you caught it. Fabulous. Okay. Joanne, thank you so much for doing that. And what we're obviously building up to is just a basic cascade pattern. Yeah. Okay.
That's
Thank you, Joanne.
very,
You're a gem.
that's hard.
Um, it is hard. Juggling is very hard. Yes, but not as hard as diabetes.
Not as hard.
Not as hard as diabetes. Okay. Actually, Joanne, one more question. What was your experience of Bob as a juggling coach?
Bob's number 2.
Yes, the second guy.
Very sweet, very
Yes.
patient, um,
Patient.
encouraging.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Lovely.
felt
Okay.
like I could
That was the
fly.
intent.
Yeah. I didn't
That's it.
feel silly when I failed.
Okay. I'm curious, Joanne, for you, which of those coaches feels more like diabetes management?
No- Number 1, Lou,
No question, right?
no doubt.
No doubt. Yeah. Okay. Um, great. So I'll ask folks on the call who watched that, to also think back to those 2 coaches and consider like, what was different about them? I mean, they were both after the same goal of teaching Joanne to juggle, But man, the emotional experience of those was really different. So for me, this is kind of a good summary. So Lou highlighted and reinforced what Joanne was doing wrong. You keep dropping. Kept telling Joanne what to avoid dropping. Lots of alarming each time something goes awry. Lou's a big fan of data, but the data was just focused on a couple variables. Lou pushed Joanne to learn everything at once. Start with 3 balls, just juggle. There's a lot of focus on outcomes and goals. So the goal is to juggle, you're not doing it. And overall, I don't know if this was as obvious, but there's kind of a motivator there around like controlling it and being disciplined and avoiding something.
I can also say it was really surprising how disturbing the sound was. That
Yeah.
is, those are the alarms. I don't think of them, but that was annoying.
Yeah. And I loved that you were able to notice I can feel like the anxiousness that it brings up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And sometimes we don't even, because we're just so used to that part of diabetes, we don't actually acknowledge that. Yeah.
yeah, that was great.
Um, yeah. And so Bob, different style, more about highlighting and reinforce what Joanne was doing right. And I would say Bob took the approach of juggling is hard. So let's start with 1 ball. Lots of positive reinforcement. I didn't really talk about context, so ignore that for now. Lots of scaffolding. So we'll start with 1 and then we'll work on 2 and focusing on process. So when Bob noticed Joanne sort of passing that ball horizontally, like that's a process we're going to want to interrupt because that's not going to be helpful for it later on. Kindness, curiosity, warmth, compassion, and maybe this last part wasn't so obvious, but motivating in kind of a different way.
I wanted to please you. I wanted to be successful for you.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. Yeah, when someone responds to you with a kind of curiosity and kindness and warmth, like you're pulled in. Yes. And I think a lot of diabetes is like Lou in lots of relationships, but also the relationship to the technology. And so hopefully folks are getting how this metaphor is relevant. Um, but I think it's interesting to consider how can our diabetes technology and our relationship to diabetes be more of a Bob relationship? And this includes the relationship you have with yourself, because most of us have an inner Lou and an inner Bob that sort of has a lot of commentary about what's going on in diabetes. So that's what we'll explore in this talk. Um, and we'll have, I hope, plenty of time for questions. And depending on how tight the timing is, I can speed up or skip some things. So the first way that I like to think about this is this framework of bright spots and landmines, which is from my first book. And I actually, lots of that book was tactical tips and advice, and that stuff is helpful. But I actually think of this as a very powerful framework for learning. So if you take a look at this slide, this is a 24-hour CGM trace. We've all seen lots of these in our lives. Think about how, every 24 hours of diabetes has a story. And CGM sort of pulls us into this kind of storytelling. What caused what happened, what can I learn, what might I change? And so I'll invite you to look at this and see if you can just come up with a story. Like, what do you think happened to me on this day? And feel free to throw it in the chat, or if you want to unmute, you can sort of share what you think the story is here. Maybe we'll come up with a couple different stories. What do you think went down on this day?
I'll
What do you
try.
go for it?
So I'm gonna guess you maybe didn't bolus enough at dinner, so you're kind of high coming into midnight. You did
Hmm.
really well, and then you were getting ready to eat. You got distracted. You forgot to bolus, and then the rest is history. That's that big spike right around 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Just takes time
Nice.
coming down.
Nice. Nice. I see we have 10 comments in the chat, so people have some other ideas too. I'm not going to pull up the chat, but Carol, would you be willing to read some of people's hypotheses in there?
Unmute me. 1 second. All right, let's see what we've got here. Um, you had a cookie.
Okay.
You forgot to bolus for a big lunch.
Yes.
Stress.
Stress. Nice.
Acting lunch.
Good.
Maybe you had a stressful event.
Good.
Most was very good. If I saw your
Nice.
data,
Good. You're skipping ahead, but I love it. Good.
um, pod failure, you
Okay.
slept in and ate a lunch, ate out and miscalculated carbs.
Good.
You miss
Okay.
it?
Good. These are great. These are great. People with diabetes are so awesome. So I want folks to notice this process just in general. Like CGM pulls you to do this. Why? Why did this happen? And it is just such an automatic way that we are all wired because as humans, we like things to make sense. So all of those stories could be true, depending on, you don't know much about this day yet. But this is, I think, one of the most frustrating parts of living with diabetes is that this storytelling process is constantly operating and sort of seeking things to make sense. Okay. So most of what we do in diabetes is a lot like Lou. And pretty much everyone who commented on what this was said, this is what happened that was wrong. So you could imagine the alarms going off. You can imagine the avoid highs. Landmines are this experience of something happens, it explodes into a blood sugar, that is not where we want it to be, let's say. So we are all naturally very good at finding these sorts of things, both as humans and as people with type 1. And inherently, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think for most of us, it is our default 24-hour way of operating in diabetes. So I think it sounded like there was only one person who pointed out, like, actually, this was a pretty solid day. And I think I actually want folks to notice that. I mean, 80 something percent of this day is in tight range. So while something interesting happened in that mid-afternoon there, most of this day was just fine. And I think what's interesting is if you went into a healthcare appointment with this data, most doctors and healthcare providers in general love to find problems and solve them. So that becomes a kind of social training as well. Like, what do we do with data? We find problems and solve it, rather than notice what's working and try to replicate that. And those are two very different frames to approach diabetes. So when I talk about bright spots, I'm talking about that latter. Like, what's working? What's going well? What should I keep doing? What should I replicate? What happens on ideal days? What actions and choices make that possible? What are the behaviors that work? And how can I do more of that? That is a very, very different framework from, doing this. What's not working? How can I fix it? And I think we do mostly this in diabetes, and we could do a lot more of this. And that, hopefully, when you saw me trying to coach Joanne juggling, that was evident in Lou's approach versus Bob's approach. So I think that actually is, this is a data that's quite old. So I don't remember what happened on this particular day, but here are some of the things that I would note. So average BG 117, time in range 87 in tight range. I did take a 2-hour bike ride, and I think that might have been the early afternoon spike, you know? Or maybe it was the reason I went on the bike ride. Took action on my CGM data. I didn't eat anything wild. I waited to eat until my BG was dropping. I got enough sleep. I even did meditation on this day. So mostly I think a day like this calls for kindness, gratitude, appreciation, self-compassion. And most of us would look at a day like this and try to, like, at least for me, I'd like ruminate. My instinct would be to ruminate on like what caused the spike. And so just want folks to notice the difference there. This is a kind of graphical way of representing this. We tend to overweight, I think, landmines thinking in diabetes. And my invitation is to at least do more of noticing what's working. So when I gave this talk, it was to mostly industry folks, but I'll invite you as a person with diabetes to notice, you know, especially as a looper or a CGM wearer, notice there is a lot working on a given day. And we often don't give ourselves any credit for that. And one thing to get better at doing is to notice when things are working, what am I doing? So that you can replicate that stuff more often, because we often are just sort of doing the opposite. And I really like, this is a lovely show. If folks haven't seen it, it's like a biography of Einstein called Genius, Einstein. And I really love this quote from it. Tools don't make discoveries, people do. And I think it's helpful to remember that CGM or any data analysis, these are all tools, and they still need us as people to kind of make some discoveries. And AI is really cool and great, and it can do lots of neat stuff. But I think it's helpful to remember it's not just about noticing what's not working, being more of, it's not just about being a Lou all the time. Like, you can also access some of Bob. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is skills, scaffolding, and experiential learning. So back to our original question of how do you become more skillful at juggling? And you probably noticed what I was doing with Joanne. So juggling is not something you learn all at once, and it's not something you learn conceptually. So I could give Joanne a PowerPoint or a brochure about juggling, but you can't learn how to juggle from knowledge. You must learn it through experience. So I'll give folks just a little demo here. So with Joanne, we started with 1 ball and got that down. And then we worked on 2. And then ideally you built to 3, like that. Now 4 is kind of interesting, because to do 4, you actually have to do 2 in one hand, both in a fountain pattern and in a columns pattern. And you have to be able to do it in both hands. So you can't juggle 4 until you have 2 in one hand really solid in both hands. And then I don't really have enough room to juggle 5 because of how my camera's set up. But 5 requires like a lot more skill than 4, and so takes a lot more time to learn. And because 5 is a crossing pattern, the skills you learn in 4 are only partially relevant to 5. So it's just, in juggling or learning an instrument or anything difficult, it's pretty obvious that, like, oh, I have to learn how to play scales first, or I have to learn how to throw first. But it's so funny that in diabetes, we like don't remember that it's the same thing. I mean, there's so many skills that you need to live with diabetes, and we often just don't give ourselves any credit for that. We're just expected to be able to do everything all at once immediately. So one invitation I have, and this is also a space where you can be kind to yourself, and why I think learning any hobby as an adult from scratch is really helpful, because, you know, when I was learning to juggle, every time I dropped, it's not like I'm gonna just beat myself up over that. It's like, no, this is like a difficult thing I'm trying to learn and I'm new to it. So I'm gonna try to get better. I'm gonna try to learn and see what I can do. But it's funny that in diabetes, we just expect ourselves to be amazing and great at this really difficult skill set, all that's 24/7, and we're hard on ourselves about it. So I think it's cool if folks are like musicians or have other hobbies to consider, like, how do you show up to yourself in terms of improving at that skill or hobby, and how might that relationship be relevant and helpful in diabetes too? So I would argue diabetes is actually, it's much harder than juggling, first of all. Because in juggling, this is just another thing that's maybe not obvious to folks. Like, how do you get better at stuff? You get better at stuff through feedback. So if Joanne and I were trying to juggle with our eyes closed, it's actually really hard, if not impossible, to juggle with your eyes closed because you can't see the balls. But the feedback in juggling is perfect. In other words, I can, if I throw really badly, I see it immediately. But the feedback in diabetes is not perfect. It's delayed. It's often not related to what I've done. It's related to some other thing that I'm not tracking. And so it's harder to get more skillful at diabetes because the feedback is less real time. It's like less precise than something like juggling. So it's possible to have diabetes for years and to not get more skillful, which I just think is really interesting. And just another thing that we should think about in terms of being kind to ourselves. So when I think of skills, it's like, just think of all the skills you need to take medication. You know, you have to acquire it. You have to store it properly. You have to, in my case, take it out of the fridge and not, if I put cold insulin in my pump, it seems to like add a bunch of air bubbles. So, you have to learn how to fill a reservoir properly and get the air bubbles out and put it in the reservoir. It's like there's a whole set of behavioral skills just for taking insulin. And then when you think about, wearing devices, using data, eating food, I mean, all of these things have hundreds of skills embedded in them. And we're just expected to master all of them and be great at them all the time. And I think what's hard is that because diabetes is tied to the rest of your life, all of like the skills that you need will change over time. So in a teenager, if there's like a teenager might be struggling with their sleep because they're on their phone at night, that's going to impact their diabetes the next day. Like, okay, we need to work on sleep skills. Whereas, someone who's eating food to cope with their feelings, like, okay, we need some psychological flexibility skills and some skills around food. So everyone has kind of a different profile of skills and things they need to work on. And it's not a way of shaming or criticizing ourselves. It's more from the space of, wow, I am a really good 4-ball juggler. And what do I need to do to get to 5? Where do I need to kind of practice and do a little bit more work? One of the ways I think about this, even as a closed loop user, is like bolusing for eggs versus bolusing for pizza and sushi. Like pizza and sushi to me are like 5-ball juggling problems. I mean, they're really difficult to dose for, even with closed loop system. And I could probably get much better at them. I think one thing that's hard in diabetes is it's often hard, unless you're like really intensive about tracking, it's hard to be like, what did I do the last time I ate pizza? Like, how did I dose and what was going on that day? And then how can I learn from that for this particular moment? Like, most of us are just kind of winging it all the time. And I think that's one of the things that makes diabetes really hard. So I think it's interesting to think about diabetes from this framework of like 1-ball, 2-ball, 3-ball, 4-ball, 5-ball, like scaffolding, like doing a little bit better and doing one skill at a time within particular domains and being kind to yourself as you do that. And then also remembering, like, it's pretty difficult to learn from your experience in diabetes. Like, what happened the last time I did this? And so for me, it's helpful to, like, pizza and sushi are things that I'd probably only eat them like once a month or maybe a couple times a month. And I have a really nice time socially when I'm, with someone and eating those sorts of things, but they're a nightmare for blood sugars. And so when I know there's sort of a reliable set of diabetes landmines, that's a space where I try to have a little bit more awareness and slowing down and tracking what I'm doing so that I know for next time how to get a little bit more skillful at it. Okay, and then number 3, context, curiosity, compassion. Okay, so for this, this is a fun experiment. I've now done this with hundreds of people. It's pretty fun. So we're gonna do a diabetes control experiment, okay? So here's how we're gonna do it. Everyone in the room, if you have diabetes, I want you to check your glucose right now and see what it is. And in fact, if notice too, like when you check, if you have a reaction to it. Right? Sometimes we have a relief reaction. Oh, I'm okay. Or like an anxious reaction or a frustration. Like, I just want you to notice that piece too. Okay, so whatever your glucose is, here's what I want you to do. I want you to control your diabetes and make your glucose 12 points higher. Go. 12 points higher. Go. I'll give you 10 more seconds to do that. Yeah, just control it. Go ahead, turn the the knobs and the dials. Was anyone able to do that successfully? Control their diabetes? No. Lots of shaking heads. Okay, how about, let's try a different one. I want you to control your diabetes and make it 9 points lower. Go. Yeah, so done this with a lot of people at this point. Everyone has the same reaction. They look at me and laugh and shake their head. Okay, so a question. Can you control your diabetes? I mean, in the way that we use the word control in daily life, can you control it? I mean, we just did a little experiment there. So sometimes I think that most of us operate under the assumption that we can control it. We're supposed to control it. And experientially, we just tested that. And I think most people recognize, like, you don't really control your blood sugar in the way that we use the word control. Like, when I control the volume on my TV, I take out the clicker and turn it down, and I can control it very precisely. But that's not really how diabetes works. So it's interesting because we use a word that doesn't actually fit the kind of context of living with diabetes. So sometimes I think about living with type 1 is like, okay, you're given this stereo, and a diagnosis, they say, okay, you need to control this thing, and there's 3 things that matter: your medication, your insulin, what you eat, and your exercise. And if you take care of those things, you'll control your diabetes and everything will be fine. So this is kind of like giving someone a stereo with 3 knobs and saying, get these dialed in right, and you'll have perfect, beautiful sound. You know, your bass and your treble and your gain, let's say. So we do that to the best that we can. And most of us find, that's not quite how it seems to be. I don't know what's up here. And one of the things I'm the most proud of probably doing in my life is putting together this poster, which is when I worked as a journalist in diabetes, I just started sort of cataloging, like, I'd go to talks and read research, and I just started cataloging, like, gosh, there's a lot of things that seem to affect blood glucose that people talk about. So the first list was 22, and this one has 42, and who knows, there's probably 100 different things that seem to affect blood glucose based on research, based on experience, and lots of different areas. And I think what's important, there's a lot of things that are important to note about this, one of which is you don't have control over every factor. Many factors just happen and you have to deal with them. Many factors, like, you look at something like number 6, alcohol, or number 12, medication interactions, or number 16, high intensity exercise. Many factors seem to increase or decrease blood sugar, and sometimes it's hard to know which it's going to do. So when I think about diabetes, I think about more like a stereo with at least 42 knobs, and you don't have control over every knob. Like, some of them are just like, locked off and you can't access them. The knobs seem to reset every day. So you're sort of looking at a different set of knobs. And, sometimes the sound is not where you want it to be because of, you don't have access to every knob. And that's just the reality of diabetes. So I think many of us learn this through experience, but we still carry this framework with us and this framework with us. I'm supposed to control this thing, and there's not that many things that affect it. But in reality, it's a really complicated stereo. And of course, all of these knobs are actually kind of interrelated. So I'll just give you a simple example. Let's say I wake up feeling tired and I just have like extra caffeine that day. Well, caffeine has an 8-hour half-life, so it's often the case that if I have too much caffeine, I have a hard time getting to sleep. And if I get too little sleep, the next day, my body's in a state of physiological stress from too little sleep. Okay, well, when I get too little sleep and I'm feeling stressed, I'm actually less likely to exercise that day. And when I don't exercise that day, I feel more tired, because exercise for me is often like kind of energizing. And so I'm likely to just kind of feel sluggish and then reach for more caffeine. And then you can see how just 5 variables there can kind of loop in a cycle. And most of us have cycles that look like this in some way. There's cycles that sort of spiral and feed on themselves. And I think it's good to be curious about what sort of bigger picture cycles happen for you, particularly cycles around, I feel some emotion like anxiety, which is totally understandable with diabetes. I soothe that emotion by doing some behavior, and then that behavior leads to certain consequences that then often prompt more anxiety, and just that cycle feeds itself. That's like a common example, I think, too. So it's good to be curious about that, what plays out for you. So I'll invite you to consider the idea that this notion of diabetes control is kind of an illusion. And we just demonstrated that. I mean, I asked you to control your diabetes with very precise criteria, and it was not possible. So this is not to say that blood sugars aren't important or that diabetes is hopeless. It's not what I'm saying. Blood sugars matter, and your choices matter, and taking insulin and what you eat and exercising, all these things matter and are super helpful. And we don't control this thing. It's not in the space of changing the volume on my TV. It's more like that complicated stereo system where I do the best that I can with knobs I have access to and that influence the sound. And when things aren't what I expect, that makes a lot of sense because of the complexity. And so this is why I think noticing this instinct around control and accepting that it's not really the way that diabetes works is really important for mental health. So I'll offer some different ways of thinking about it. Maybe instead of controlling diabetes, we think about it more like influencing it, or managing it, or balancing it, or holding it, or carrying it. These are, yes, they're just different words, but words link to a whole network and story and area of meaning around how we relate to something. And so I think control prompts a particular way of thinking about something. And then when that something like diabetes doesn't operate that way, it's really upsetting and distressing, and it's very easy to blame ourselves. And so these other ways of thinking about it, I think, can really change our relationship to how frustrating it is. And so I'll just share like a really quick example, and then we'll dive into some questions. So this was a couple years ago, almost a couple years ago at this point, or more than a couple years ago at this point. I was at work and I was sitting in a meeting, and I had one of those sort of lows that creeps up on you. So you can see on the left side there, I was, like around 100, and then 90, and then 80, and then suspend. And meanwhile, I had that pretty significant low symptoms, right when I got that alarm. And so I went to the pantry area of work, and I got one of those mini Cliff Bars, like those real little guys, like the kind of like 1/3 Cliff Bar, and ate it. And I was like, this is perfect. It's just like a perfectly small amount, and I'll be solid. And of course, what happened was what you see, which is a spike right up to 252. And you can also see at that point I had 7 units on board. So I had, for my insulin sensitivity, like more than enough to get back in range. But it's just so interesting how an example like this prompts this kind of mental chatter on the right. Like this cursing experience, like God darn it, or I'm the worst, or I'm bad, or I should have known better, I'm a terrible person with diabetes. Like many of us have this kind of internal self-criticism Lou Lou the juggling coach inside, just beating us up over what happens. And I think a way of relating to this with more kindness is to remember, sometimes I just picture that 42 factors poster, and I'm like, wow, this is really hard. Mistakes happen. I'm human. I don't have control over all of the things happening. So, I can notice what's going on, choose a response that's skillful, and try to work on being kinder and more self-compassionate to myself. And one of the cool things I've learned as a therapist is you can actually train people to be more self-compassionate. Like it is a skill set, just like learning to juggle, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 balls. So I think that's really cool. And maybe the last thing I'll leave folks with is, this is a quote. I don't know who is the originator of it, but I think I read about it in this book, Emotional Equations, which I actually think folks on this call would like. It's by this guy, Chip Conley, and he says, disappointment is expectations minus reality. So how, a recipe for disappointment is to have really high expectations and then reality does not meet them. Makes total sense. We've all had experiences like that before. So I think this is kind of what makes diabetes so upsetting for many of us. So we have this expectation, because this is what we're told at diagnosis, that I'm supposed to control this thing. So it's about control, and there's data, and there's self-discipline, and I'm just not motivated enough. And there's just these simple knobs, like there's medication, there's glucose monitoring, there's food and exercise, and I'm supposed to control the thing. Like that is the expectation that's set. And then the reality of diabetes, which we learn very quickly, is that it's complex. It's a complex biopsychosocial, so biological, psychological, social, contextual, behavioral. In other words, your behavior happens in a context, condition, intimately linked to the rest of my life. So if I'm stressed out parenting, let's say, or having a puppy, that was something we experienced a year ago, like that probably is going to show up in my diabetes management somehow. So it's a complex biopsychosocial contextual behavioral condition intimately linked to the rest of my life. I can't measure, predict, or influence or control every factor that impacts my diabetes. And it all changes every day. So the move is to respond to it, to respond skillfully. But I think our expectations are of control, and the reality is complexity, and the result of that equation is disappointment or self-criticism or frustration. And I think part of what I want to do when I do talks like this is help folks reset their expectations around what the reality of diabetes is and to be kinder to themselves, because that's important. Sometimes I think about it like this, imagine all of the things you do as a person with diabetes. It's like you're an amateur endocrinologist, pharmacist, dietitian, exercise physiologist, therapist, nurse, data scientist, supply chain inventory manager, risk analyst, teacher and advocate, and executive assistant. Diabetes is not just a medical condition, it's a portfolio of part-time jobs. And you don't get paid for them, you don't have health benefits included, and there's no time off. I mean, it's kind of wild what we all manage. And I think this is important to acknowledge because it resets those expectations and I think builds a foundation for kindness towards ourselves. So what I'll leave you with is I think this diabetes control narrative is like it's time to sort of set this aside because I think it does set our expectations out of touch with the complex reality, and it can really bring up a lot of feelings for folks. Remember that data and tech, these things are tools, and we can use tools well or poorly depending on the context. So a hammer is great for driving a nail into a wall. A hammer can also, destroy a vase or destroy my thumb if I don't aim it well. So tools have to be used like skillfully and wisely, and it's also possible to use them like to rely too much on them. So, if I'm gripping a hammer so tight, I can't even use it skillfully. And I think sometimes that can happen with CGM data, like it's possible to hold it too tightly. And so it's interesting to think about your relationship to data. And then remember this fact that like this is a portfolio of part-time jobs. So I'll invite you to think about how your technology and your inner kind of, where's your inner Bob? Where's your inner kind of encouraging coach that can be with you in dealing with this really challenging situation of juggling diabetes. And yeah, so notice what's working, find bright spots. Remember this idea of skills and scaffolding and learning from your experience. And then also don't forget how complicated diabetes is. It's a lot of factors that affect it, and you don't have control over all of them. Okay. There we are.
Well, thank you so much. I do we have a few more minutes if there are questions in the chat.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Hey, Tina, have you been monitoring chat?
Yes. We have one that just popped up. I have no inner Bob. This is my problem. How would you address that, Adam?
Oh, I love that. So Bob is a skill set that you will have to develop, just like, learning to juggle. So what I would recommend is there's a couple books I'd recommend. I'll just put them in chat. So the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook is a great one. That's by Kristen Neff. They have a whole program around teaching people to be more self-compassionate. I think that's great. You can learn if you email me, I will send you some prompts that I sometimes do with clients. That is my email. Writing a self-compassionate letter. You can practice metta meditation, which is a way of sending kindness to other people and then also working on sending it towards yourself. I think those are some of the places I would start. You can also recognize you probably have Bobs in your life. You know, if you have someone that loves you, like there's probably a good amount of Bob like in that relationship. And so you can like start to be okay internalizing that. The other thing, so this idea of self-criticism, like most of us learn this at some age. Like babies are not born with this kind of self-criticism experience. So for instance, it's a really common response to trauma. Like if you've been through something traumatic, it's how do you make sense of a world where something like that can happen, right? So self-criticism like kind of makes sense. Like, oh, I'm to blame. I'm at fault, right? So, oh, I got in a car accident and someone was seriously injured, like it must be my fault. Now, most of us who are outside of that situation can recognize like, I don't know about that. But often if something like that happens at a young age, it just becomes this kind of comfortable narrative that then sort of solidifies. And then we have to work on recognizing like, wait a second, self-criticism is not the only way to go through life. Sometimes with clients, I'll share this metaphor of imagine you have two pet donkeys, okay? And you're gonna train your donkeys to go to market. So the first donkey you train just like Lou would. Every time this donkey does something wrong, you hit it. And the second donkey you train by giving it carrots. Every time it does something right, you give it a carrot. Now, both donkeys may make it to market, but one will arrive very sad and depressed, and the other will arrive happy and full of carrots. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Like, what would it be like to be kinder to yourself and to kind of build that muscle? So I don't know. I hope that's helpful. Wendy, I appreciate you bringing that. I think that is a really common experience, by the way. So this is another way when we're self-critical, we feel alone. And so part of self-compassion is recognizing that you're not alone, that we all have an inner an inner Lou, the self-critic, and we can learn like different ways of being with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely stems from my childhood for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Adam, thank you so much. We're all going to be searching for our inner Bobs over the next year. 2025 is the year of the inner Bob. But can you just remind everybody you've got a private practice, where it is?
I
Some
do.
folks about that area, if you don't mind. Just a
Yeah.
commercial.
Yeah. So I have a private practice. I'm a therapist in San Francisco. So folks are local here. I can see you in person. I tend to do less therapy virtually because I'm such an experiential therapist, but I can do it if you're in California, and particularly for people with diabetes, like not all of us are local or can travel. So yeah, if you're interested, you can reach out. Yeah. And at some point I'll do some more group type things and I'll let the community know when that's available.
Well, thank you. I think we all feel so much
That'd be
better.
so
when we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, someone asked if the charts are available.
Yeah, I will, what's a good way to do this? I'll just post the slides to my site and I'll send you all the link and then anyone can just download them. Does that sound
Thank
okay?
you. Thank
so
you.
much. All right, let's give Adam a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, Adam.
This was amazing. Everybody's smiling. Everybody's happy.
Oh, that's very sweet. I appreciate you all.
Well, thank you so much.
Speaking of that, do we want to get a screenshot?
Oh, yes.
Of
Could everybody
smileys.
show their video?
Yeah,
Miroslava,
turn your cameras on.
Miroslava
Ready?
likes us to get
Yes,
pictures, so
I'm
Tina's
here.
making it happen today.
Just one
Well,
sec. One more
yeah.
second.
Yeah, any more can turn their cameras on? Some people can't.
I'm smiling, Miroslava.
I got it.
Okay. Sorry.
Sometimes it's hard to
I got it.
smile on command, authentically.
Yep, yep.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Adam. All right,
you.
bye.